Today's story is one of the most amazing comeback histories of all time. It is the tale of how Intel overcame its darkest moment in the mid-80s to become the giant chip company it is today. But to truly appreciate this epic journey, we'll have to start from the beginning, which involves a physicist named Bill Shockley. Shockley's work at Bell Labs and his contributions to early semiconductor research were crucial. But did you know that his findings during World War II influenced the decision to drop nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Stay tuned till the end of this video to find out more about this fascinating story and learn why Intel's journey is one that you do not want to miss. After the war, Shockley returned to Bell Labs, where he was at the heart of the most important invention in the history of technology, the transistor. In 1948, Shockley and some of his colleagues by the name of John Bardeen and Walter Brattain applied for a patent for a germanium transfer resistance unit. But Shockley conducted his research often in secret because he considered his colleagues his fiercest competitors. In 1950, Shockley released a 558-page book titled Electrons and Holes in Semiconductors, which would become a Bible for scientists working to develop new variants of the transistor and other devices based on semiconductors. By this stage, he was generally regarded as the sole investor of the transistor, which further put strain on his already tense relationship with his colleague Bardeen and Brattain. Even with all of that, Shockley didn't think he was getting enough recognition for his work, and having falling out with almost everyone he worked with, he decided he needed a change. He left Bell Labs, spent a semester at Caltech, and then a year working for the government in Washington, D.C. But nothing fully satisfied him. He knew he was more capable than anyone else, and so he decided to do things his way by starting his own company. Shockley flew to LA, where he met with Arnold Beckman, a chemist and businessman. They discussed the idea of a new lab that would build cutting-edge semiconductor devices, and in February 1956, Shockley and Beckman announced that their semiconductor lab was open for business. Beckman wanted Shockley to establish his lab in Southern California near his own company, but Shockley thought Mountain View was a better location. For one thing, as the head of Stanford explained, it would be highly beneficial for Shockley Semiconductor and for Stanford to be close together, and Mountain View was close to where his mother lived in Palo Alto. In December of 1956, Bill Shockley was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics for his work inventing the transistor, a prize which he shared grudgingly with his former colleagues Walter Brattain and John. Somewhere else far away, Soviet tanks were rolling into Hungary's capital, Budapest. It was at the time of the Hungarian Revolution. Thousands of civilians organized into militias to fight the authorities. In an attempt to quell the violence in Hungary, the government withdrew from the Soviet-aligned Warsaw Pact and pledged to reinstate free elections by the end of October 1956. That promise subsided the violence, and the protesters thought they had won. However, orders were received from Moscow, and the crackdown was swift and brutal. By the middle of November, the authorities had killed over 2,500 protesters, extinguishing the flames of revolution. 200,000 Hungarians fled, and one of them was Andros East von Goethe, a 20-year-old chemistry student who would later change his name to Andrew Stephen Grove. After graduating, Grove moved to the other side of the United States to obtain a PhD in chemical engineering from Berkeley. Meanwhile, Bill Shockley had just founded Shockley Semiconductor in Mountain View. Despite his undeniable brilliance, Shockley was one of the most notorious figures in the history of technology, with a reputation for being a tyrant. Less than a year after receiving his Nobel Prize, 8 of the lab's best researchers walked out. One of them was Eugene Kleiner, who then went out to seek assistance from Arthur Rock, who suggested that they start their own company. Rock approached 35 different investors without success until he met with Sherman Fairchild, who agreed to invest in the young researcher's vision for the future of semiconductors. Sherman Fairchild, the inheritor of IBM's founder estate, invested in 8 researchers who presented their vision for the future of semiconductors with silicon substrates. He agreed to loan them $1.5 million to start their company and gained the right to buy the whole company for $3 million. The researchers founded Fairchild Semiconductor in 1957, and in 1965, Fairchild Semiconductor shocked the industry by pricing its integrated circuit products at just $1, far below production cost. Impressed with Rock and Kleiner's work, 2 men by the names of Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore approached Rock with a proposal to take research into computer memory in exciting new directions. They believed that they could marry silicon semiconductor technology with computer memory, and with everybody's consent, a new company was formed, and raising $2.5 million, Rock was appointed as the inaugural chairman of the new company, founded in Mountain View. They initially considered going by the convention of calling the company Moore Noise, but ultimately decided on the name Integrated Electronics, now known as Intel. Gordon Moore and Bob Noyce recruited Andy Grove as Intel's first ever employee and tasked him with developing 3 different memory technologies simultaneously. The bipolar memory technology proved its viability, the fastest, and became Intel's first product, the 3101 SRAM chip. It was twice as fast as the competition and sent a clear signal to the industry that Intel was a force to be reckoned with. The 1101 SRAM chip was also developed in parallel with the 3101 and was the first widely produced chip made using silicon gate metal oxide semiconductor technology. Intel's next product, the 1103 DRAM chip, released in October 1970, made magnetic core memory completely obsolete and established Intel as a world leader in memory manufacturing for a whole decade. Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore capitalized on this success by taking Intel public at a market cap of $58 million in October 1971, just 2.5 years after the company was founded. This was only the beginning, with just weeks later, Intel created the world's firstly widely available microprocessor, the 4004, which was designed for a series of calculators. The 4004's miniaturized CPU made it possible for small machines to perform calculations that only mainframe computers could do. Intel followed up with the 4004 with the AD08, the first 8-bit microprocessor, and then released the 8080, the first truly general-purpose microprocessor, which soon became the industry standard. The Altair 8800, which used an Intel 8080 CPU, was designed and manufactured by MITS, was the first mini-computer kit to rival commercial models. The release of the Altair inspired by Paul Allen and Bill Gates to create a version of BASIC to run on it, which led to the founding of Microsoft. Steve Wozniak, partly inspired by the Altair, built a microprocessor into his video terminal and created the Apple I with Steve Jobs, leading to the establishment of Apple. Intel continued to grow and introduced the 8086 in 1978, marking the beginning of the famous x86 architecture. Intel's early success can be attributed to the informal weekly luncheons with their direct reports, which worked great when they had 200 employees. However, with rapid growth, they needed a more scalable management approach. Intel's founders implemented a program that emphasized openness while delegating decision-making to the lowest levels, avoiding luxuries like limos and long lunches. They trusted staff to solve problems, maintaining a focus on the micro and macro at the same time. Andy Grove's paranoia also helped Intel stay on top of the industry. He was always afraid someone else was going to build something better, and so he urged senior executives to allow their employees to test new ideas. Intel's successful partnership with IBM and the release of the first widely adopted personal computer, which featured an Intel microprocessor, created a vast ecosystem of software and other peripherals. Flush with the money that the PC was generating, IBM paid $250 million for a 12% share of Intel. Intel's first attempt at a 32-bit processor system was a disaster. It ran 5 to 10 times slower than competitors. They eventually got better. Intel pioneered memory chips, but slowly Intel's rivals also learned how to make DRAM chips. And they came after a piece of the market that Intel had created. Fearing for their survival, Intel partnered with some Japanese firms to take some of the pressure off. But this helped the Japanese firms climb up the learning curve, and since they had more capital than Intel, they eventually turned on Intel and became competitors. Eventually, Andy Grove and Gordon Moore, founders of Intel, realized that their business model of manufacturing memory chips was no longer sustainable due to the competition from the Japanese conglomerates. They knew that they had to pivot to a new business model, and after much internal resistance, they decided to focus on microprocessors, which were not yet an attractive revenue source. Andy Grove understood the reality that Intel had to lose its memory chips, or it would lose everything, and so he directed the head of Intel's memory division to develop a plan to get out of the memory business. But the guy refused. Andy fired him and ordered his replacement to do the same thing. Despite the brutal process of firing loyal employees, Grove knew that he was trying to turn around a huge ship that was rapidly taking on water. In 1986, Intel lost $107.23 million, and until 2022, it was the only year that Intel had ever lost money. It was closing factories, laying off thousands of staff, and was headed for bankruptcy. When Andy Grove took over as CEO of Intel, he faced the biggest challenge of his career, pivoting the company away from the memory chip market to microprocessors. The 386 microprocessor was Intel's life raft, and Grove knew it had the potential to save the company. He decided to protect it at all costs by not licensing the design to any other manufacturers. This decision was a big risk, as it defied standard industry practice and angered Intel's biggest customer, IBM. However, the decision proved to be key to turning Intel around. Intel, Compaq, and Microsoft worked closely together on the earliest batches of the 386 processor, resulting in the launch of the Desk Pro 386, which became the most advanced and high-performance personal computer in the world. IBM's response, the PS2, was a total disaster and ultimately left Microsoft without any viable competitors. Intel's success with the 386 and 486 processors allowed them to invest heavily in creating new and faster designs. The company's marketing campaign, Intel Inside, increased consumer interest and demand for computers that has Intel processors. Intel's partnership with Microsoft was also a key factor in their success, as every PC with an Intel processor was shipped with Windows as the standard. While some criticized the partnership as anti-competitive, it was undeniably good for Intel, with their annual net income topping $1 billion in 1992 and revenue reaching almost $6 billion the same year. Intel and Microsoft dominated the computer industry for many years, and Windows PCs that had an Intel processor became the standard. Andy Grove's tenure as CEO saw Intel transform into the world's dominant producer of microprocessors, leading to a significant increase in market cap and revenue. However, by the time of his death in 2016, Intel had lost its preeminent status as a semiconductor manufacturer due to the increased competition. Whether Intel can regain its position remains to be seen, but everyone who hears this story can admire the dramatic turnaround. And that's it. Be sure to catch our next video featuring more authentic success stories from the most influential people and top brands.